Today, our topic is consequences of applying access specifiers and modifiers on constructors. In the previous videos, we saw consequences of applying access specifiers and modifiers on class, variable. Now we are talking about constructors. Followed by this, we will have a presentation on consequence of applying access specifiers and modifiers on methods. So this is constructors topic. On constructor, if you apply access specifiers and modifiers, what the consequences we will face. Here, all the Java developers should notice one thing, that on constructor we can apply only access specifiers, not access modifiers. We cannot apply any access modifier on constructor like as you are applying for class, variable or method. They are different. So if you look at the constructor syntax, constructor, when you see the constructor, it looks similar to the method. Not it will look similar to the method, it is almost a method, but whose name is same as class name. Constructor name is same as class name, but contains without return type, because the constructor return type is the same class type itself. So while seeing the constructor, we'll almost find the same similar syntax as the method. So it starts with access specifier first, but no access modifier exists. You should not write any access modifier like abstract, final, static, native, synchronized, transient, golden. No access modifier we should apply. No return type exists. No return type exists to the constructor. We shouldn't say there is no return type to the constructor. The constructor return type is the class type itself. That means in the employee class constructor return type is employee type itself. In student class constructor return type is student type itself. So constructor implicit return type is the class type itself. Hence we should not write any return type to the constructor. Then followed by the constructor, same as the class name, and then followed by various list of parameters. We can write no parameter to one parameter to any number of parameters as we want in the constructor. So parameter type we should write first, like int or string or float or double or char or boolean or something like that. Then followed by parameter name. Again parameter type, parameter name, and so on. And if you look at the syntax carefully, in the syntax, I kept access specifier in angular bracket. What does it mean? While writing constructor, access specifier is optional. Which access specifiers we can apply on constructor? You can ask me. You can apply private, default, protected, public, all the four. So at the end of the presentation, we'll learn what happens if we declare constructors private, constructors default, constructors protected, constructors public. Protected, public, private, default labels. So this we will discuss later on. Initially our presentation contains, a little information about the constructor. What is default constructor? What is no parameter constructor? All those concepts we'll discuss. After that we'll start the consequences of applying various access specifiers on constructor. Okay. Because I mentioned access specifier in angular bracket. So to constructor, writing access specifier is optional. We needn't have to write anything. So if you don't write anything, the default access specifier of the constructor is default itself. Default access specifier. The next constructor name same as class name. Anyway, later on we'll see the examples, employee or student or whichever class you are writing. With that same name, the constructor we should write. So constructor name writing is compulsory. And in the constructor, the parameters are again kept in angular bracket. That means they are also optional. But a constructor may contain 0, 1, 2 or n number of parameters. If parameters are passed in the constructor, with those parameters, the class instance variables are initialized in the constructor. Suppose if you don't pass any parameters, default values will be initialized to the class instance variables. For example, if you take employee ID, employee name, salary designation, if you take employee ID is int, employee name is string, salary is double, and designation is string. Suppose if you write employee class constructor with no parameter, and if you don't write anything, by default employee ID is 0, employee name is null, and so on. Salary is 0.0, designation is null again. Otherwise, if you pass any parameters, we can assign those parameters to this class instance variables. So anyway, we'll see that as an example at the end of the presentation. Right. The syntax is clear. Access specifier is optional. Write constructor same as class name. Writing parameters are also optional. And constructor begin and end with a parenthesis. And its body open and close with the flower basis. Now coming to the default constructor. Before discussing the consequences of applying access specifiers on constructor, we'll discuss about default constructor. That is what I said. What is default constructor? What is default constructor? Default constructor, the name itself mean, the default constructor, the name itself mean it is by default generated. It is by default generated. By default generated means if we don't write any constructor while writing a class, if we don't write any constructor in the class, during compilation time, the compiler will go and check in the class whether the constructor is written or not. If no constructor is present, compiler will automatically generate one default constructor in every class. Compiler automatically generates one default constructor in every class. Such a constructor is called as a default constructor. But remember, if developer writes a constructor, one or maybe more than one, once if developer writes a constructor in the class, no compiler will generate a default constructor. Default constructors are generated by default. And if we don't write any constructor, by default generated constructors are called as default constructors. So if you look at this class A, I just opened and closed floor basis. Here open floor basis, here I close floor basis. Floor basis open and closed. That's all. If you don't write any constructor, and the class A is blank, nothing was written in that. And I haven't declared any variables and no constructors, no methods were written. Just floor basis is opened and closed. So it's an empty class. So you compile the class with the Java compiler, Java C A.Java. You compile A.Java, immediately during compilation, compiler will go and check in the class. Is class is having any constructor or not? But there is no constructor present in the class A, then automatically compiler will generate one default constructor in the class. How default constructor is generated is a question. Class name is A, right? With the same name, one constructor is generated. A of default constructor is generated with the same name as class name of course constructor. The default constructor is generated with no parameters. With no parameters means see how many parameters are passed here? No parameters. Default constructor is generated with no parameters. Default constructor is generated with no parameters. And second point is that too, its access specifier is same as the class access specifier. What is the access specifier of class A? Default. What is the access specifier of class A class constructor? Default. And a default constructor is the constructor generated by the compiler during compilation time. If no constructor is present in the class, if developer don't write any constructor in the class, the constructor by default generated by the Java compiler is called as default constructor, whose signature is no parameter and whose access specifier is same as class access specifier. And because class access specifier is default, constructor access specifier is also default here. If you look at the next example, In this example, I'm writing public class B. Class access specifier is public. Previously, class A access specifier is default. Right? That is why in the default access specifier class, constructor is generated with default access specifier. Now, the class B is public, but no constructor is present here. We haven't provided any constructor in the class, but class is public class B. During compilation time, once again compiler will go and check in the class. If no constructor is present, constructor automatically generates one no parameter constructor. This is same. No parameter constructor is same, but whose access specifier is same as class access specifier. Whose access specifier is same as class access specifier. And if class is public, constructor is public. If class is default, constructor access specifier is also default by default. So this is what called as default constructor. And once again, I am repeating who will generate the default constructor. The default constructor is generated by compiler if developer do not provide any constructor in the class. That point is very clear. And what about its signature? Always no parameter. What about its access specifier? Same as class access specifier. Finish. The next. Default constructors are generated by compiler only if no constructor is present in the class. That point is clear. Now we are coming to the consequences of access specifiers on constructors. How many access specifiers exist? Private, default, protected, public. 4. Suppose what happens if you write a private constructor in the class? What happens if you write a private constructor in the class? If you write a private constructor in the class, remember, in Java, you'll find in JDK, in Java software, you'll find a jar file named rt.jar. If you open that rt.jar, you'll find some around 17,000, some odd number of thousands of classes exist in that rt.jar file. In that rt.jar file, almost one not maybe 1/10 or 1/5 or 1/10 of the classes are found with no constructor present in the class. But if you read the API documentation of those classes, you don't find constructor. You don't find public constructor. If public constructor is not present in the API documentation, it means the class is having a private constructor. The constructor was hidden. Private constructor. To such private constructors, nothing will be shown in the API documentation. So, you will find so many number of public classes whose constructor access specifier is declared as private. Do you know what happens if class is public? Once if class is public, it is having 5 scopes. It is having 4 scopes. A public class can be accessed in 4 scopes. Where they are? A public class can be inherited in the same package. A public class can be instantiated in the same package. A public class can be inherited outside the package. A public class can be instantiated outside the package. 4 scopes. So, public class can be accessible anywhere within and outside the package. Up to that point is clear. But in the class, if public class contains a private constructor, if we explicitly write, intentionally if we explicitly write a private constructor in the class, finish. Once if private constructor is written in the class, see, in how many ways we can make use of class. One is by inheriting and one is by instantiating. And a subclass and instantiate class. So you write class A, some public class A, private A of. In the public class A, you write private constructor A of. See what happens. You write public class B extends A. And you don't write anything here. Just compile b.java. If you compile b.java, compiler will go and check. There is no constructor present in this class. What happens immediately? Compiler will generate one public no parameter constructor in B class. Public no parameter constructor in B class because B class is public. Okay. Constructor default constructor is generated with no parameter. No parameter. Remember one rule that in every constructor, the first statement should be the calling of superclass constructor. Every subclass, every child class constructor should call superclass constructor. Though we don't write superclass constructor or calling from subclass or child class constructor, that statement exists implicitly in every constructor. So, because compiler generates the default constructor, in that the first statement superaf will be generated. Because it is formality that every child class constructor will call superclass constructor. If we explicitly call, we may call parameters constructor. If we don't write, the default constructor will always call no parameter constructor of superclass. So B class constructor is calling superclass no parameter constructor. But provided if the constructor's default or protected or public is something, then that constructor would be accessed from the child class. But because A class constructor is declared as private, because the superclass constructor, A class constructor is declared as private, the moment child class constructor is referring to superclass constructor, because it is private constructors, private members cannot be, private members of the class cannot be accessed. This cannot be accessed. Immediately Java compilation. Okay, immediately during compilation, you will get a compilation error saying that B class cannot be generated. B class cannot be compiled. Sorry, not generated. B class cannot be compiled. B class cannot be. Reason will be rolled like this by compiler. B class cannot be compiled because your B class default constructor is trying to call superclass and a parent class A class constructor whose access is private. Private members of the superclass cannot be accessed in subclass. Finish. Your B class cannot be. And by stating that as a reason, compiler says that B class cannot be compiled. Finish. Within the same package, a class cannot inherit from a class which contains private constructor. After all, if a child class cannot be generated, suppose if you write one more class, public class C, in that if you are trying to access something from somewhere in the public static void main, and because if you want to run standalone program, till public static void main A, the same package, C is also in the same package, A is equal to new F. Finish. You do like this. After all, child class constructor couldn't call the superclass private constructor. How can the C class, after instantiating A class object through its constructor, it is also trying to call the same A class constructor, but A class constructor is private. How that private member can be accessed? And if class is having a private constructor, it can either be inherited and instantiated within. If not within the package, how come outside the package? That's all. A class containing private constructor cannot be inherited or instantiated within or outside the package. Then who will access the class? If no class can inherit or instantiate a private constructor containing class, then who will access the class? Then what is the use of such classes? See, if constructor is declared as private, such classes cannot be inherited or instantiated. We can't subclass or we can't instantiate or create object. The class cannot be instantiated like this. The class cannot be inherited like this. The same two examples given here are explained here. Class cannot be instantiated. A class constructor cannot be accessed from child class. B class constructor also. These two cannot be done. Then what is the use of such classes? The same point I told you yesterday also. After working for 2 to 3 years or 4 years of experience in Java, in the object-oriented programming, a developer will slowly get habituated to not only developing the applications by the personal interest, they will become a designers also, object-oriented designers, object-oriented analysis and designing. They'll involve more. They'll design the classes. They'll analyze how the class should be. They will design how the class should be. The next, how the class should be implemented. That is how they'll design the classes. Sometimes we'll get a requirement to create only one single object of our class throughout the JVM. Sometimes we'll get a requirement to instantiate only once, then to create only one object of our class throughout the JVM. Our class should not be instantiated multiple times. Such a requirement will come. In Java API, you'll find so many number of classes which acts like that. Such classes are called as singleton classes. People say singleton object, it's not singleton object, it's a singleton class. Singleton class means that class contains only one single object. But don't say singleton object. Singleton object is wrong. Singleton class is correct. Singleton class means it indicates that the class contains only one single object. Such a class is called a singleton class. So in Java, you'll find so many number of singleton classes in which the constructors declared as private. Then because the constructor is declared as private, no class can inherit or instantiate within or outside the package, then how the class can be used? Then what is the use of the class? Yes, the class can be used, but how? Not by inheriting. Getting me? So not by inheriting. The class itself, the class which contains private constructors is a class. The class itself creates one object of the class. The class itself creates one object of the class and returns that object to the client. So within the JVM, as when number of classes want that A class object, everyone should ask A class one method. That method will return same object to everyone. Such an object, object is called as a singleton class object. Then how that object is created and who will create that object means. Classes which contains private constructor. In those classes, you will also notice one more method called public static. Public static. The class return type, one method exists with a name called get instance. Now, suppose if class is public class A, class is public and constructor is private. Private A of. Constructor is private. Immediately followed by the constructor, you will find one method called public static A get instance. And in every singleton class, you will find one static method called get instance, whose return type is the same class type itself. And the A class, because class is A, the get instance method return type is also A. And whoever invokes that get instance method to all of them, that get instance method will return the same object. And then first time the get instance method will check whether already object is created to that A class or not. If not, first time object is created, from the second request onwards, same object will be returned to the clients, multiple clients. So this is the example. Class A, constructors private. Constructors private, followed by immediately you will find a static A get instance. The moment you call get instance method, what this get instance method is checking, this method is checking already whether this class, and who will create singleton class objects, the same class itself. One method, one static method exists in the same class itself creates singleton class objects. So the moment get instance method is called, this method will check whether this class is already instantiated or not. How this method knows that this class is already instantiated? That is why in class A, we declared one reference called a static AA. And we created one reference to class A, we are creating one reference within the same class with its modifier as static. Because static methods can access only static members, static variables. Static. The method is not static, I would just simply declare it as an instance variable. So because of the method is static. So in the static method to access, I declared one static AA. In the get instance method, what I'm checking if A is equal to null. That means if this reference is null, and when first user requests this get instance method, that time this A reference is null. What is the default value of any class reference? Null by default. Null by default. So because first time it is null, we are immediately creating a new object. A is equal to new AF. New A class object is created and returned to the client. And from the second request onwards, the same existing A object will be returned to the client, but not multiple instances. So as many clients request singleton class object, to all of them, the same object will be returned, not multiple objects. Such an object is called as singleton class object. After getting singleton class object, you can invoke any of its methods. You can call XYZ, you can call element. In singleton class, you can have, what you call, these are instance methods. Non-static methods are called as instance methods. And PQ or MNO or static methods. Static methods are also called as class methods. Class methods. Static methods are called as static class methods. Static variables are called as class variables. And non-static variables and non-static methods are called as instance methods or instance variables. And then for every instance of the class, memory will be allocated to these methods. But to these two methods, the memory will be allocated in the class memory. So that is how. So then the class execution is as normal. However the methods are, that's how you call them and the methods will be accessed. So this is how singleton class object can be obtained. A is equal to a.getInstance. In the A class, we are calling static methods. Static methods can be called directly with the class name dot method name. A.getInstance that returns A class object. A.xyz, A.element. A.xyz, A.element both we are calling because they are instance methods. And what? The remaining two. PQR and MNO methods we are calling with the class name dot method name because they are static. Static methods can be called with the class name dot method name. So that is how singleton class explanation is completed. Why we are discussing about singleton class? Because classes in which the private constructors exist, their main intention is those classes want to be a singleton classes. So for singleton classes, declaring class constructors private and providing one static method that returns the same class object. With that, the users can access various methods with the class. That is about singleton class. Here are some of the examples of singleton classes. In Java.ET package, you will find one class called resource bundle. This is used in internationalization. Resource bundle dot get bundle method, that if you give any property file name where all the language words exist, language dictionary exists. That resource, and I'm not going to explain about internationalization in this occasion because it's a big topic here. So resource bundle is used to load the language dictionary files. With the local object, we can select which language dictionary file we want to select, and from that we can get the words, we can get the messages. So resource bundle is used in internationalization. Runtime class is also having one method called get runtime. Resource bundle class is having get bundle method. Runtime class is having a get runtime method. See, while running Java applications, we write Java, some class name A. Being exists in the class A, in class A, what is Java means? What is Java? Java is a Java virtual machine launcher. JVM launcher. So this JVM launcher internally acts as a runtime to our class A. JVM is having a very big architecture that we'll discuss later on. So in whichever the runtime environment of the class A is running, that is started by the JVM launcher, if you want to access that in the same class A, how do you access? Runtime dot get runtime method if you call. you will get current runtime environment. From that runtime environment, we can access various information like OS information, RAM information, the next various environment variable properties we can access. Runtime environment we can access, and by accessing the runtime environment, we can execute exe files also. Runtime.exec. Exec method exists in the runtime.getRuntime. That will return runtime class object runtime.exec. Yeah, exec. And that if you give any exe file located in your machine, that exe file can be. See, especially when you're developing a notepad or edit plus kind of editors in Java, and if you develop your own editor in Java, if you develop your own editor in the Java, in that editor, if you provide one menu like help, the next we want to open notepad, calculator, MS Paint, browser, something like the Windows inbuilt or any externally installed software. If you want to open from the Java notepad or editor, they will use the same runtime class, runtime.exec. That if you give the exe file, if that exe file directory already exists in the path, immediately the moment you select that menu item, that exe file will be open. So this is open for that. Then to run the current system exe files, we can use runtime. Logger class, it is used in the log4j. Log4j is again a big topic. Log4j. Logging the messages. Every real-time application doesn't exist without log4j. That one. And the next toolkit, it is used in AWT. Toolkit.get toolkit. Here logger.get logger. Here toolkit.get toolkit. Get default toolkit. Something. Toolkit.get default toolkit, I believe. Yeah, get default toolkit. If you call toolkit.get default toolkit, it is used in AWT. AWT means abstract window toolkit. To develop graphical user interface applications in Java, we use AWT or JSense Swings. AWT uses the operating system native components like labels, button, text field, text area, checkbox, edit button, scroll bar, etc. JSense Swings, the UI components are purely written in Java. In AWT uses current operating system components, UI components. So if you call toolkit.get default toolkit, you will get that toolkit of the Windows operating system if you are running your application on Windows. The same toolkit.get default toolkit method, if you call on the application running on Linux operating system, the toolkit.get default toolkit method will return a Linux toolkit object. Similarly, Solaris toolkit, otherwise Unix toolkit, Macintosh toolkit, Windows toolkit. The current operating system toolkit object will be returned. From that you can call, create button, create label, create text field. So operating system native components will come up in AWT by using toolkit object. Similarly, document builder and document builder, these two are used in XML DOM programming. XML DOM is again a big program. XML DOM programming. Document builder factory and document builder. And the next, similarly, system class. In system.read, system.out.pindle, system.iar.pindle. So in system class also, the constructor is private. But system class, nobody will instantiate. Similarly to the math class. And a class which contains only static methods and static variables. If class contains all static variables and static methods, then we don't need to create object of the class. Why we need to create object of the class? We need to create object of the class to invoke the variables and methods of the class. If all the variables and methods of class are declared as static, then no need to create object of the class. Such classes are also declared as, in such classes also, the constructor is declared as private. Then not only in singleton classes which contains only static variables and static methods, such class also contains private constructor. So that is about the explanation on all this singleton classes. This entire singleton class explanation came from the private constructor. Then coming to the default. Coming to the default, see, we already know about default. Default scope is only within the package. Here, if you notice, the class is public. Public class A. If class is public, it is having 4 scopes as I explained before. Inherited, instantiated within the package and inherited, instantiated outside the package, right? So its scope is 4 scopes. But class is public. It is having full scope to be accessed anywhere within the system. But in the class, we are explicitly writing one no parameter constructor with a default access. No parameter constructor with a default access specifier. In public class, we explicitly wrote one no parameter default access specifier, one constructor we are explicitly writing in the public class A, explicitly written default access specifier constructor finish. Then you tell me what is the scope of this class, up to what extent this class can be accessed. Because of this class constructor access specifier is default, it can be accessed anywhere within the package. So it can be subclassed or it can be instantiated only within the package. And this public class A can be accessed only within the package but not outside the package. Within the package it can be both inherited, it can be subclassed, and it can be instantiated only within the package. Though class is public, it cannot be inherited or instantiated outside the package. That is the consequence of declaring constructors default access specifier. Class cannot be inherited, class cannot be instantiated outside the package, but within the package both can be done. The next come to the protected. Protected you already know. Protected members can be accessed anywhere within the package and can be accessed up to subclass outside the package, but not into instantiated class outside the package. That is the rule of the protected. And a protected member can be accessed within the class, subclass within the package, instantiated class within the package, subclass outside the package, but not to the instantiated class outside the package. So, coming to the protected constructor, public class containing protected constructor. And a class can be inherited within the package, class can be instantiated within the package, and class can be inherited only up to outside the package. Class cannot be instantiated outside the package because constructor is protected. Protected members can be accessible up to subclass outside the package. So it is having three scopes. Within the package, it can be inherited. Within the package, it can be instantiated. And outside the package, it can be inherited. But not to instantiate outside the package. Because if the constructor contains protected. If public class contains public constructor. If public class contains public constructor, then it can be both inherited and instantiated within the and outside the package also. But to write public constructor, class should be public and the class must also be prefixed with the package declaration. In the class example, I have clearly explained a public class without package or package containing class without public. Package containing class without a public or public class without package declaration has no use. It can be accessed only within the package but not outside the package. So, if constructor is public, make sure your class is public and make sure your class is also placed in a package. If all three are satisfied, your class can be both inherited and instantiated within and outside the package. Constructors don't accept any access modifier. Here is one small example given on. How to write constructors. So far what we have completed about the syntax of class, constructor. The next we have covered the default constructor concept. The next we have covered the consequences of applying access specifiers and constructors are clear, private, default, protected, and public. Now we came to the example on explaining how to write constructor and how many constructors we need to write in a class. And if I give you a class and asks you to write a constructor, these many number of constructors, minimum number of constructors you can generate. Class is public class, okay, employee. The next public class is having int employee name, string, salary double, string designation, double gross salary, double net salary. Okay, employee name, salary, designation, gross salary, net salary. 6 variables. But don't worry about whether are they private or public. Forget about that. Okay. Class is having 6 instance variables. What is the purpose of class having the 6 instance variables? What is the use? Class containing the instance variables, its purpose is to hold values of different employees. See, at the end of yesterday I gave you an example. If a small organization of having a strength of 5 or 10 employees, to the 5 or 10 employees at the end of the month, if you want to calculate the salary, then this information is not sufficient. Number of working days, number of attended days, number of holidays, number of absent days, number of leaves applied, the next basic pay, gross pay, net pay, and so many variables are required in the class. Probably some 15 to, only for the salary calculation, some 15 to 20 variables are required. Okay, the point is, at the end of every month, the organization consists of even 5 to 10 employees also wants to create 5 to 10 objects of this class. In each employee object, one employee information should be stored. And then further various methods should be called, like calculate total number of days, calculate leaves, calculate loss of pay, calculate net salary, gross salary. Like these methods must be called to get the final salary. So because of to hold 5 to 10 objects of 5 to 10 employees data by these employee objects, in employee class you must declare variables, and as well as in the employee class you must provide a constructor so that the user can, while creating the object of employee class, the user can pass various arguments into the constructor. Remember, while writing constructor, whatever variables you are writing, these should be called as parameters. And while passing the values in the constructors, these should be called as arguments. Arguments are passed at runtime. Parameters are written at development time. So the class must provide sufficient number of constructors to for the user to pass various employees data into employee class object. So here 4 employee objects are created, 4 different constructors are used. Only the same 4 argument or 6 argument constructor may be called, and 5 to 10 employee objects may be created at the end of the month to calculate the salary. So anyway, we'll see how to invoke each of these constructor and how to write this corresponding constructor. Suppose if user want to create employee class object with no argument constructor, this is called as no argument constructor. Similarly, while writing say no parameter constructor, while calling no argument constructor, this is single argument constructor. This is 4 argument constructor. 4 argument or all argument. 4 argument constructor. This is 2 argument constructor. This is called 2 argument constructor. No argument constructor, single argument constructor, 2 argument constructor, 4 argument constructor. So if client wants to create employee class object with no argument constructor or 1 argument constructor or 2 argument constructor or 4 argument constructor, 6 argument constructor, those many number of constructors must be provided in our class. And sometimes user want to create employee class object without any information. Maybe he want to assign data later on. And sometimes user want to create employee object with primary key as an argument. Sometimes user want to create employee object only with employee name and his designation. Sometimes it's all the 4 arguments. So however the client requirement exists, that's how we need to write the number of constructors. So here, in order to satisfy that, in the class, I'm writing one public no parameter constructor. How to write public no parameter constructor? Public EMP with no parameters. This is one constructor. From here also, by default, implicitly, superclass constructor will be called. What is superclass to employee class? There is no superclass to the employee class. But in Java, to all the classes, the supermost class is object. If you don't write any superclass to employee, if you don't write extends or anything, if you don't write any superclass to the employee, by default, the superclass is object itself. So object class constructor will be called by the super statement. Then next coming to, this is public single parameter constructor. Public single parameter constructor with the primary key property as a parameter. A single parameter constructor with the primary key property as a parameter. So here I am writing public EMP in key ID. That employee ID, I am calling superclass constructor that employee I'm assigning to class instance variable. But here remember in this occasion, here both constructor parameter name is EAD and class instance variable name is also EAD. If you simply write EAD is equal to EAD, what happens, this EAD will be assigned to the same itself. So, but don't do that. The same EAD will be assigned to the same EAD. But this constructor parameter won't be assigned to class instance variable. But how to differentiate class instance variable and constructor parameter? Class instance variables are called with this keyword. This is the implicit object reference of the class. With this, we can differentiate that this represents, it is a current class object variable or current class instance variable, EAD. This dot EAD is called EAD. In the next, here we are writing two parameter constructor, public two parameter constructor with required or essential variables as parameters. And an employee class may consist of 15 to 20 parameters, but to create an ideal employee object, only with employee name and his designation and salary, probably 3 would be enough. Like that, if you feel employee and other, number of attendant days, leaves, absence, etc., we don't want. We want to create one ideal employee object with employee name, salary, and designation. That's it. We just want to display some report, like who are the employees available, what is their designation, and what is the salary. We want to take a printout of all the employees. See, before giving the salary, we don't care about employee or etc. We care about only just employee name, his designation, and his salary. We just want one report. So based on that, we arrange some funds for the salaries. So if you write constructor with 15 or 20 parameters, and client need to put a lot of effort to pass each and every argument, 15 to 20 arguments, until then if no object is created, they will be withdrawn from creating the employee. So sometimes you even provide a constructor with essential parameters, essential variables as a parameters, or essential properties as a parameters. So in employee class, which are essential parameters, employee name and designation, let us assume. You write one constructor with only those two parameters. Take them, and with this you differentiate class instance variables and constructor parameters. You assign employee name to employee name, designation to designation. Finish. The next, coming to the fourth one. Public all parameter constructor or public 4 parameter constructor with all class instance variables passed as parameters, you write one constructor. Here we are taking employee name, salary, designation. Employee assigned to class instance variable employee, differentiated with this. But remember, here parameter name is en and class instance variable name is ename. So we need not have to differentiate. Directly you can assign en to ename. En to ename. Similarly, salary, designation. This is how 4 constructors are written, and then this is a client program. In the client program, we created employee class object with no argument constructor, with single argument constructor, with a 2 argument constructor, and then with a 4 argument constructor. After creating the object, let employee may call any number of methods as well. So this is how we ended up the constructor syntax session. The next session is on consequences of applying access specifiers and modifiers on method. Until then, thank you. Goodbye.
Like, share and subscribe. Hit the bell icon for more updates.